What is FATCA? People talk a lot about the Foreign Account Tax Compliance Act. It's a law that was passed in the US not that long ago, and it's had a lot of unforeseen consequences. In this video, I'm going to tell you exactly what it is and what it's all about. Hi, I'm Andrew Henderson. If you search anywhere on the internet for offshore tax strategies, you're no doubt going to come across FATCA. And while this law was started in the United States, it's actually triggered a lot of other things that impact non-US citizens, non-US residents. It's really come to impact a lot of people all over the world. Here's what it is. So back during the recession, the United States went through and said, we're going to do a stimulus plan. Let's go and build some roads and build some bridges and throw a bunch of money down a drain to hire people, have the government come in and try and create prosperity. Well, that's going to cost a lot of money. So what Congress in the United States will do is they say, hey, we're going to spend a bunch of money, but let's balance it. So now we have the revenue part of the bill. And the revenue part of that bill was, let's go after these nasty people who are living and banking overseas. And let's create a mechanism that requires every bank in the world to report to us, the US government, and tell us about all these Americans and green card holders and everybody else who's within our purview. And let's know what they're doing, because there's probably a lot of nasty people out there who are hiding their money, and we want to know about it. The reality is, for years, there was FBAR. There was basically a different part of the government which was saying, we want to know where your bank accounts are. If you're an American, you should tell us. But there wasn't as much enforcement because not every bank had to tell the government where your accounts were. What FATCA did was it came in and said, we're going to put together the infrastructure because we're the United States. We are kind of the epicenter of the financial system. Hey, you're a financial institution. You're a bank in another country. You're going to comply with our rules. You're going to tell us everyone who banks at your bank or has an account with your brokerage firm who has U.S. indicia. And if you don't, we're going to slap a big withholding tax on everything that you do through our financial system, and you're going to basically be living in a gutter. And so what did the banks do? Well, they did one of two things. Some of the banks said, okay, great, we're sending Dear John letters to everyone we know who may or may not be an American, and we're going to kick them out. We're going to stop accepting new U.S. persons. We're going to close all the accounts of existing U.S. persons. By the way, that includes people who are living in other countries who may have mortgages, may have checking accounts for their day-to-day life, may have retirement accounts, whatever. You're out. We don't want to deal with you. Happened a lot in Switzerland, as well as other countries. Mexico had an issue with this at one point. So what happened is, now you've got a lot of U.S. citizens, U.S. persons, who many of whom are living overseas. They can no longer do day-to-day banking. They can no longer keep their accounts. But what also happened was, if you were not a U.S. person, you were getting letters from your bank saying, hey, we need to fill out this tax form. Can you certify that you're not a U.S. citizen, etc.? Because the idea was that the banks would do the enforcement for FATCA, where they would put such onerous penalties on these banks that, again, some of the banks would just say, you know what, we don't want you. Other banks would say, we're just going to make life difficult for everybody because now we've got this big bureaucratic burden. And so everyone who would come to these banks, they'd be like, are you a U.S. person? Here, please sign this new tax form that the U.S. government came out with certifying that you're not subject to anything. And so it really sucked everyone into the vortex and made life miserable for a lot of people. And so the end result is that anyone who had U.S. citizenship, U.S. green card, was born in the U.S. as identified in their passport, had a U.S. phone number, U.S. address, was even sending some payments or receiving money from the U.S., like anything related remotely to the United States, would be deemed as a potential U.S. person. And then banks would have to figure out, do we need to report this person? And they became pretty scrutinous. And so the end result was a lot less access to financial services. A lot of banks just, again, said, we don't want Americans. And so was that an unforeseen consequence? Was it an unforeseen consequence that the idea was, we're going to collect a bunch of money that people are hiding overseas by forcing everyone to comply? Maybe they shook some money out of the tree. I think that the short answer to that is no. And the real question is, were these truly unforeseen consequences? Was the goal to collect extra revenue? Was the goal to figure out who's hiding money? Perhaps not. Perhaps the goal was just to make it so difficult for people to go and bank overseas. The people would say, forget it. And if that was the mission, then it worked, because people in our industry went out, screaming bloody murder, saying Americans can't open a bank account anymore. Now, I made a video where I said it's absolutely incorrect. There are plenty of banks that accept U.S. citizens. Switzerland's pretty much closed. Liechtenstein is closed. Certain other countries are closed if you don't have that much money. But that's the general trend that the world is going, because here's what FATCA inspired. It inspired the Common Reporting Standard, CRS. So now 100 and some other countries are now sharing information in FATCA style. This has become the new standard where everyone just exchanges information with each other. Banks are closing down business in many cases to non-residents. Compliance standards are up. Banks are de-risking. And in general, this idea of going where you're treated best is becoming more and more difficult. It's still possible, but the old ways that worked and the old ways of doing it no longer work. That was all inspired by FATCA under the guise of saying, we don't want people hiding money. It's the same thing, Interesting Life is saying, well, we don't want anybody shooting each other, so let's just take people's guns. Obviously, in the United States, that's a thing. It's a very hot button issue where they say, no, we need guns so that when the criminals come to kill us, we're going to be able to protect ourselves. But the same principle didn't apply here, where the idea is criminals are going to be criminals, but meanwhile, a bunch of honest people who just wanted to diversify, who just wanted to bank in different currencies, who just wanted to live somewhere else, needed a checking account to pay their rent, are going to have a really hard time doing that. That was the law of unforeseen consequences. And so if you've ever had to deal with these new forms when you've opened a bank account, now you know it's related to FATCA and now related to CRS. What's actually interesting about FATCA is that the United States really isn't following its own rules, because when the global FATCA, CRS, came out, the US said, no, we're not going to be part of that. And so when I made our video on non-CRS banking countries, the most ironic one of all was the United States, because they demand everything from everybody else and then say, no, you know what? We'll let your citizens hide their money here, use our anonymous LLCs, keep their money in our banks, and we're not going to play ball with most of you. But this is what has ushered in this new era of transparency. Fine, we'll deal with it. But there's been a lot of unfortunate consequences, and that is what FATCA is all about.
I'm Andrew Henderson, and if you're looking for a way to legally reduce your taxes, build your freedom, and create wealth faster as a global citizen, then you've come to the right place. I want you to do 3 things right now. Number 1, click the button to subscribe to our channel. Make sure to get notifications so you never miss a new video. Number 2, get a copy of our #1 best-selling book, Nomad Capitalist, on Amazon, and learn all the dozens of benefits of our lifestyle. And number 3, if you're already a 6 or 7-figure entrepreneur and you want to put these strategies in place, go to nomadcapitalist.com and find out how to get some help.